Hello, fellow Rebel Capitalists. Hope you're well. Just in my hotel. Got a doctor's appointment this morning for my eye. As most of you have been following the story, had surgery. I don't know if I've gone over it on this channel or not, but on Saturday I had to go to an emergency appointment because my eye got extremely infected and I was losing my vision. So there were some concerns that something could be going on that may cause permanent damage, or that could cause a permanent loss of vision in my left eye. So I had an emergency appointment. Fortunately, I was able to get one with a specialist in Medellin on Saturday. And good news is he wasn't concerned at all about the health of my eye long term, but he said that I've got one of the most severe infections he's ever seen. So ton of antibiotics and blah 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 blah. So anyway, back to Miami this morning to see the main surgeon and see what he says and kind of go from there. So anyway, that's what's going on as far as the sunglasses and keeping you guys up to date as to the health issues. And as most of you know, that's why I haven't been doing a lot of whiteboard videos, and I haven't been doing any interviews at all, and been doing limited content. So can't wait to get back to 100%, where we're cranking out the normal amounts of content that I like to produce. Okay, so let's go into this story. And I think this is really, a lot of us, including myself, get really caught up in what's going on in the world today and assume that what we're dealing with is completely unprecedented. And a lot of times I really like to give myself a timeout, if you will, and go back to the 1970s, which is a decade that I'm very fond of, when I was born in 1973. And I to a certain degree, I remember the 70s a little bit, and but I think we just had so much more of an honest dialogue between opposing opinions. And I remember the Phil Donahue show. I don't know if any of you remember that, but just remembering that was daytime TV, that was the Oprah of the day. And Donahue was a very liberal guy, but smart and very intellectually honest and curious. And as most of you know, he interviewed our good friend Doug Casey. He interviewed Ayn Rand. He interviewed, of course, Milton Friedman. But my point is, I like to go back and see if Milton Friedman ever discussed some of the problems that we are facing today that seem insurmountable, that seem just too big to tackle, that we're doomed in a sense, right? Or maybe see what his opinion, or see if he addressed some of the narratives that we're seeing with the current World Economic Forum. Because let's not forget, they were around in the 1970s. In fact, on the plane down here, let me go ahead and do a screen share. Let's see, we got the screen share on. So I won't go into it too much, but this is the actual book. You can see I'm on page 66 here of 190. This is a book that the World Economic Forum put out, and I downloaded it and started reading it on my flight last night. And I don't want to go all the way to the top because I don't want to lose my place. But this is, maybe we can go over here and you guys can see. So this is just basically a book that's an kind of an, how would I explain it? It's like a brief history of the World Economic Forum year by year. And the main things that occurred at this Davos meeting from 1971 pretty much to, I don't know where it ends because I'm not at the end of the book. I think it ends in like 2010 or 11, 12, something like that. And so it's kind of like a brief history, the main talking points, the main things that occurred. And and then it sprinkled with a heavy dose of sprinkling is kind of a, oh, how would I say it? What's the right word? It's kind of a praise of Klaus. And I mean, every single, not everyone, but every other year, they're talking about how great Klaus is. Oh, how Klaus is amazing, and they have all these quotes from these global leaders talking about just the brilliance, and that Klaus's magnificence just knows no limits whatsoever. He is a genius among just mortal men. That's really the overriding theme. So I don't know what the right word is for that. They just boy, well, I think you guys get the picture. But anyway, so I'm reading this, and they go over the Club of Rome, which was very influential. And by the way, the reason I'm reading this is because I'm trying to do my best to truly understand what drives the World Economic Forum and how they got to where they are today. And is this just a group of people that are benevolent and want what's right, but their views are just so misguided that, unfortunately, regardless of the intention of their objectives, the fact that they're trying to um, implement them, regardless of the intentions, will result in utter disaster. And that's pretty much the main conclusion that I'm coming to. Anyway, my point is that Milton Friedman dealt with the Club of Rome. Milton Friedman was around. And one thing that I'll point out about this book and then I want to get back on topic here, is every single year they have all these distinguished politicians. They have all these business leaders, CEOs, and economists. And I have read, I didn't just scan these 66 pages, I read them word for word, word for word. And I was actually even highlighting certain things. And throughout the 1970s, and right now I think I'm roughly around 1989, 1990, not once did they even mention, or to my knowledge, I'm sure they would have said it, did they invite Milton Friedman? Not once. They invited tons of socialists. They invited Marxists, and I'm talking about economists, right? Obviously, a lot of socialist political leaders. They brought in people to debate communism. Not once did they bring in, and to my knowledge, invite Milton Friedman, who, by the way, won the Nobel Prize in economics in 1976. Interesting. But they sure as heck invited the person who started the Club of Rome. That was in, I believe, 1973 is when they invited the gentleman in to talk about their famous paper called The Limits of Growth. That takes us right back to the topic at hand, which is Milton Friedman and him addressing pretty much the energy crisis that we see today in Europe, and that we may see within the world in the next 5 years. And then going over the solutions. Because what we're seeing, although it feels as though it's unprecedented, even for me, it is not even close. These are the same things that humans have been dealing with for hundreds and hundreds, potentially thousands of years. Maybe not with oil and energy, but with as an example, my good friend Simon Black, the other day on his podcast, talked about the Bronze Age and how at the end of the Bronze Age, they were freaking out because in order to create bronze, you have to have tin. and their whole economy and the society became so dependent upon bronze. So when they started running out of tin, you started hearing the exact same arguments as we hear today about running out of energy and oil. And sure enough, they allowed human ingenuity to flourish and solve the problem, which is why I always say, we can solve these problems if the global elite, if the authoritarians get out of the way and just allow the brain power and the collective brain power from the last 200 years of engineering and science, combined with the 7 billion people we have on the planet. Let the free market work, for heaven's sakes. And magically, like we have over thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, human ingenuity will prevail. But see, the problem we have right now is we are stifling human ingenuity. And we are doing the opposite. We, the authoritarians and central planners, are doing the opposite of what we need to have happen. And this, more specifically, is the price mechanism. As Dr. Friedman points out, we're going to play a couple clips here from this video, which I'd strongly encourage all of you to watch. But as Dr. Friedman points out, that the function of price is what solves these problems. This is what creates the incentives around releasing that human ingenuity that I was referring to earlier. But as you guys know well, what are we doing right now? The central planners and the authoritarians are doing everything they possibly can to F with the price of the energy, therefore distorting the price mechanism and preventing the actual solution. See, I mean, look at what this gal is doing. And, listen, the gal in Great Britain here, this new gal Truss or whatever, hats off to her to try to increase supply. But then she's capping basically the price that people are paying. And Schiff pointed this out brilliantly on his podcast yesterday, that this is just going to increase demand artificially. And it's not, you're not allowing the price mechanism to rise high enough to where it decreases demand and incentivizes production and or alternatives to be not just discovered, but fine-tuned to the point where they're viable. So anyway, he starts off with a very clever, about a 2-minute reading from a book. And I want you guys to listen to this, because this is, again, it makes me feel a lot better that, these problems that we're facing today are by no means new, and that they've been solved in the past. And that if we just go back and look at history and look at some of the brilliant people, like Milton Friedman, the playbook is right in front of us. It's no mystery as to how to solve these problems. So let's listen to one of my favorite, if not my favorite economist of all time. It'd probably be either Milton Friedman or Thomas Sowell. They're kind of tied at the top. All right.
Day by day, it becomes more evident.
So now, just to tee this up for you guys, Dr. Friedman, obviously making a presentation with Adam Smith tie, and he is quoting from an economist, but there's a clever catch at the end.
That the oil we happily possess in excellent quality and abundance is a mainspring of modern material civilization. Oil, in truth, stands not beside, but entirely above all other commodities. It is a material source of the energy of the country, the universal aid, the factor in everything we do. It can be no matter of surprise that year by year, we make larger drafts upon a material of such myriad qualities, of such miraculous powers. The question concerning the duration of our present cheap supplies of oil cannot but excite deep interest and anxiety wherever or whenever it is mentioned, for a little reflection will show that oil is almost the sole necessary basis of our material power. The constant tendency of discovery is to render oil a more and more efficient agent, while there is no probability that when our oil is used up, any more powerful substitute will be forthcoming. We cannot make up for a future want of oil by importation from other countries. Considering how greatly our manufactures and navigation depend upon oil, and how vast is our consumption of it compared with that of other nations, it cannot be supposed that we shall do without oil more than a fraction of what we do with it. It is then simply inferred that we cannot long continue our present rate of progress. All things considered, it is not reasonable to suppose or expect that the power of oil will ever be superseded by anything better. It is a naturally best source of power, as air and water and gold and iron are, each for its own purposes, the most useful of substances, and such as will never be superseded. I draw the conclusion that we cannot long maintain our present rate of increase of consumption, that the cost of fuel must rise to a rate injurious to our commercial and manufacturing supremacy. And the conclusion is inevitable that our present happy progressive condition is a thing of limited duration. The alternatives before us are simple. We have to take the momentous choice between brief but true greatness and longer continued mediocrity. Now, if I were to ask you questions about who wrote that and when, I suspect most of you would say, well, that must have been written about 5 or 6 years ago by a very, very prescient.
And keep in mind, guys, this is 1978. So they've experienced stagflation, high oil prices, gas lines, price controls, etc.
Man, a man who really saw the future very well. Well, the truth to tell, those words, with one exception where I have taken liberty with it, that I'll come back to, were written in a book first published in 1865. The one exception is that everywhere I read the word oil, the original had the word coal, and it dealt with Great Britain and not with the United States. The excerpts I have read to you are from a book called The Coal Question, written by a great English economist, W. Stanley Jevons.
So there's kind of the punchline. That's very clever. He quoted that book and just changed out coal for oil to make it applicable to what they were experiencing in the 1970s, and what we would be experiencing today as well. And so they had the same ideas about tin in call it 2,000 years ago, or whenever the Bronze Age was, or 1,000 years. I'm not sure, not too good on my chronological history there. But same things that they were dealing with in Great Britain in 1860s, but then it was coal, and same things that we're talking about today in the 1970s with oil and other things. So then what he does is throughout this, he addresses what I was referring to as human ingenuity, the price mechanism. But then I find it fascinating that, and I think the editor kind of cut this in here, but in a different part of the speech, he started to address the Club of Rome, which had a massive influence on Klaus and the World Economic Forum. And a lot of the narrative that you hear from the global elite today came from originally Thomas Malthus, and then was popularized in the 1970s by the Club of Rome in their paper called The Limits to Growth. And what I find, again, very fascinating is Friedman, the mental giant he was, actually helped us. And thanks to the modern technology of YouTube, we can see what he said specifically, not just about the Club of Rome, but the paper Limits to Growth, which is pretty much the paper that I would argue Klaus's worldview and the World Economic Forum and the global elite's worldview is built on. So let's listen to what Dr. Friedman says about the Club of Rome and limits to growth here. See if I can find the clip.
A few years ago. You will all recall that that was a report in which engineers were saying, you will all recall that that was a report in which got so much attention a few years ago.
Here you go. So sorry, guys, I missed the point. It's right
the
here.
Broader problem is very much epitomized by the famous Club of Rome report, Limits of Growth, which got so much attention a few years ago. You will all recall that that was a report in which engineers were saying we have finite resources, a finite amount of coal, a finite amount of space, and so on and so on. Things grow at exponential rates, and so long as things grow at exponential rate, they're ultimately going to become infinite. And since resources are finite, we're going to bump into it, and therefore we are faced with a terrible future in which sooner or later we're going to run out of steel or coal or whatever you want to name, we're going to run out of. And we really have to adjust our sights. We can no longer take the view that we can have growth forever. We must recognize that there are, in their title, limits to growth, and reconcile ourselves. It's the same approach that was developed by the late Mr. Schumacher in his emphasis on the idea that small is beautiful. It's the kind of an approach that underlies the appeal of zero growth, of the notion that resources are finite. For example, in the energy case.
Okay, so I'm hoping that this sounds familiar to you guys. I mean, what they were articulating in the limits to growth is, and what Friedman just summarized, is exactly what the global elite spew today. Exactly. Whether it's Bill Gates talking about the population problem, whether it's Klaus, whether it's any of these people. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir. Whether it's the UN, the EU, it's this exact, I mean, verbatim, and this is exactly where they got it. They got it from the Club of Rome in the 1970s. And what's staggering, and what Friedman points out, is we as human beings solve these problems quite literally every single time. The human race is batting 1,000. So how could you come to any other conclusion other than the way to solve a problem? And Friedman admits there is sure, you've got an energy crisis in the 1970s. Absolutely. And just like we've got an energy crisis right now. But the problem here, the solution is not to just taking it to an extreme, looking at some of the globally, the solution is not to just take the Thanos approach and kill 3.5 billion people. Well, the solution isn't to reduce the standard of living. Or the solution isn't to cap the economic growth of poor countries, rich countries, or make rich countries poorer, and then cap the growth of poor countries. That's or to limit human flourishing. That is not the solution. The solution, and again, why this is so shocking to me, is because we're as human race, we are batting 1,000. We have a perfect record of solving these problems with human ingenuity. So this is the solution. You have to allow people, and the way you do this is to allow the standard of living to increase. And how do you do that? By using more of the dense energy sources that you have at your disposal at any given time. And then you have to reduce the regulations. You can't demonize oil companies, as an example. You can't demonize the production of energy. The politicians have to get out of the way. You can't mess and meddle with the price mechanism. Allow it to work, because the solution is free market prices and human ingenuity. So if you get in the way of those two things, which is what the global elite and the authoritarians and central planners are doing right now, then I can guarantee you we will not solve this problem. And we will be, what the world will be thrust into is where you're quite literally devolving as far as your standard of living and going back to some sort of, agrarian society where the average life expectancy is 40 and the standard of living just absolutely plummets for everyone, not just the poor and the middle class, but obviously they will be disproportionately affected, that's for sure. So, I close out every video by saying, make sure that you stand up for freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism. And a lot of you, I think, listen to that and say, yeah, that's something that makes sense to me. But what we need to realize is that's not just a slogan. That's not just a cute way to brand rebel capitalists. It's not just a way to get you to remember the video when I close things out. This is the solution, or the best solution, to the problems that the entire globe, humanity, face today. We have to allow prices to work. We have to allow the free market to work. And we have to allow and encourage human ingenuity, which, by the way, and the reason we should all be optimistic is, again, human ingenuity is batting 1,000. It has never lost, ever. So why shouldn't we put our hopes and put the responsibility on the shoulders of something that is completely undefeated? Makes a lot of sense to me, right? So again, I'll conclude the video by saying, enjoy the rest of your afternoon and make sure you stand up for freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism. Because at the end of the day, this is how we unlock the human ingenuity of the 7 billion people on the planet. And this is how we not only solve the problems, not only move society forward in the human race, but the entire planet. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next video.